In this video we will look at Richard in his teenage years, in particular his relationship with his favourites between the years of 1381 and 1385. The main aims for this video are to discuss the medieval concept of age, the decisions that Richard made as an adolescent, and the council that the king chose. Firstly then, it's important to consider the significance of the year 1381 for Richard. As we've already looked at, in June 1381, Richard successfully put down the peasants, or the Great Revolt as sometimes it's known. But this isn't the only significant aspect of 1381. In January 1381, Richard turns 14 years of age, and as a result enters a new part of his life, an adolescent. Now in today's society, being 14 means that you're a teenager, but in 1381 this was a very significant year. Richard could now marry, he could swear oaths, he could choose his own council, and he could have a share of responsibility as king. The problem is that he isn't really an adult yet. In today's society we would normally say 17 or 18. In 1381 the dawn of adulthood wasn't completely clear, and as a result adolescency was quite a difficult age for a prince, or in this case a king. Adolescents are more likely to act on impulse, engage in dangerous or risky behaviour, and are less likely to think before they act. And this is the main character of the years 1381 to 1386. And this suggestion is evidenced in what we've looked at already. In June 1381, Richard claimed in front of this peasant yeomanry class that he was their king and that they should have no master other than him. It was a very brave act, and some historians have thought that actually it's a sign of his adolescency. Therefore, the decisions and actions that Richard made have to be put in context with the age in which he's saying these particular comments. In March 1381, Gaunt had suggested that Richard should head an army in person to secure a base in Gascony in France, from which an assault could be launched against Castile. This proposal was met with hesitancy from Richard. Whether Richard recognised the problems of invading France, as he had seen in the fruitless expedition of 1378, or whether he actually just wasn't bothered about invading France and didn't want to have that responsibility as an adolescent, isn't quite clear. What is clear is that Richard spent the majority of these years here at Eltham Palace, just in the southeast part of London. And it's here at Eltham and in the hunting lodges of the Thames Valley that Richard ultimately sows the seeds to his own downfall. And this is by the selection of picking a number of favourites to his own council. The first of which wasn't actually chosen by Richard at all. Sir Simon Burley had acted as a father figure to Richard following the death of Edward the Black Prince in 1376. Burley had been the Black Prince's knight and was Richard's personal tutor. Now that Richard had become an adolescent, Richard had felt that he could reward Simon with various different grants and annuities. One such being a controversial grant in Kent, which ultimately gave Burley Eltham Palace. From here he could administer the county of Kent. He was also given significant positions within government that gave him a large amount of responsibility. The big aspect of this is that Burley had come from low birth himself, and many of the senior noblemen resented the stature in which he was given. The second elder statesman that Richard decided to choose as a council member was Sir Michael Delepole, and like Sir Simon Burley, he came from a lowly background. Michael was a son of a wealthy wool merchant from Hull. He had successfully fought for many years against the French and had been a part of the Black Prince's retinue. And in 1381 it was decided that Delepole should have the responsibility of choosing Richard's queen. Delepole chose that Richard should wed Anne of Bohemia, the daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor, and in January 1382 Richard and Anne entered into what is largely considered a very happy marriage. In addition to the elevation of Michael Delepole and Simon Burley, Richard also elevated individuals who were very similar in character and in age to himself. The first being Sir Thomas Mowbray, who ended up becoming Earl of Nottingham. He was roughly the same age as Richard and had a very similar upbringing. Thomas's father had died when he was only 2 years old. Richard made him Earl of Nottingham in 1383, Knight of the Garter as well in 1383, and Marshal of England for life in 1385. Like Sir Thomas Mowbray, Sir Ralph Stafford was roughly the same age as Richard and had had a similar upbringing as well. According to a contemporary chronicle, Richard apparently loved the lad. Ralph's father had been Hugh Stafford, who had been a member of the Second Continual Council. A large entourage emerged around Richard at this time. It was filled with individuals who were of a similar age to Richard and were sycophantic towards his attitude. Sir Thomas Clifford, John Beauchamp and Sir James Berners were other individuals that were around Richard, but none were more famous than Robert de Vere. De Vere was only 5 years older than Richard, and as a result Richard very much looked at him like an elder brother. De Vere had become close to the king through his marriage to the granddaughter of Edward III, and as a result he was given the title of the king's kinsman. His closeness to Richard was reinforced when early in his career and in the 1380s he was granted parcels of lands and special privileges, and this continued between 1383 and 1386. Now May McKissack, who famously wrote the book The 14th Century, summed up de Vere very calculatedly. He was foolish and irresponsible. He wasn't sinister or dangerous, but this was somebody that you would not want to be associated with. Richard's relationship with de Vere was met with much hostility between the noblemen across England. De Vere was Earl of Oxford already, but Richard granted him more lands and special privileges. He famously was given Queenborough Castle, which is in Kent, and he became Marquess of Ireland, the first person to be given the title of Marquess. So we've seen already that Richard surrounded himself with people of a similar age and a similar upbringing, and also senior noblemen that had come from relatively low middle class stock. At the same time, Richard surrounded himself with some rather unsavoury characters. Thomas Rushock was a Dominican monk who became the person to whom Richard confessed his sins, so that is a personal confessor. Sir Robert Tressilian became a member of the King's Bench and he was Chief Justice. As a result, he took a particularly hard line with many of the yeomanry class that had revolted in 1381. And finally, Richard also became close to Alexander Neville, who was Archbishop of York. Richard and Neville hadn't had much contact until 1385, when Richard became very close to him upon a visit to York. Perhaps the most unsavoury of all of these characters, though, was Sir Nicholas Brembre. Now, he had come from a family who had acquired their wealth as grocers, and as a result he became a Mayor of London in 1377 and later between 1383 and 1385. He had widely supported the business classes and was seen as a corrupt leader. Richard's association with Brembre is something that can be looked at and evidenced through the conflict with the previous Mayor of London, John of Northampton. Northampton had tried to make London a fairer place to live. He had legislated against unscrupulous traders, so particularly fishmongers who had formed a monopoly on the market, and he generally campaigned against any actions by those with wealth that appeared to be against the public good. Now, as a result, Northampton was hounded out of office, and Richard replaced him with Nicholas Brembre, largely through corrupt elections. So in summary, Richard makes very few decisions in these years. He becomes a married man and is on the pathway to adulthood, but more importantly, even though he doesn't make many decisions, the decisions of his friendships and his favourites is something that characterises the years 1381 to 85. He surrounds himself with individuals distinctly different from the makeup of the Continual Council, many of which are unsavoury characters. So in class we're going to look at the following 4 questions. Was Richard's marriage to Anne an opportunity missed? Was Richard displaying teenaged angst and rebelling against the senior nobleman? Did Gaunt try and assert himself in this period? Remember, we haven't spoken much about him in this video. He is still in the country. And finally, how damaging were Richard's favourites to his reign?